Hello, Tony Padlin. How are you doing, buddy? Thanks for jumping on and doing podcasts with me. How's everything going on your end?
Good, Greg. Thanks so much for the invite. Yeah, everything's going well. Busy start to the week, but yeah, really exciting. Got some good stuff happening at the moment.
Love it. I love it. And you're jumping in now to a whole new community. You've been in corporate sales and sponsorships for many decades, but now you're jumping in with this whole new community, the flipping community, acrobatics gone haywire, having fun, doing their own thing, snowboarding in the 80s, kind of thing. And you're jumping in here. So really appreciate you jumping on board with the FTA. How about we start off by you simply just telling us a little bit about you, your background, and giving everyone a brief insider look at who Tony is and what P&B agency is all about.
Yeah, with absolute pleasure. So my name's Tony Paladin. I was a former professional athlete. I used to row. So I was a pro for 14 years. So know the world of sport very, very intimately. And then just being immersed in that world, just got to know other sports. Rowing is a pretty hard mental and physical sport, but alongside that, I did a lot of trail running, mountain biking, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. There are very few sports I haven't done. And yeah, just my journey, just remaining in the world of sport and wanting to stay intimately involved has really brought me to a point of exploring, I want to say new sports, but fun sports that are fun to both participate in and watch. So I professionally am a biokineticist, which is basically an exercise physiologist. But I was always quite focused on the elite training side and the really pushing the envelope in terms of both the mental and the physical capacity. And yeah, I did some work in the Emirates, and through that, really got very closely involved to the world of sponsorship, and just finding out really how important it is to match up the right brand with the right sport so that you get a good compatibility and a good partnership. So one of the exciting parts about the FTA, and it's a direction that our business specifically has gone into, is that we at Paladin Brooks basically act as consultants. So we work closely with sports to make sure that they are sponsorable, so that their houses are in order and that they are the most attractive that they can possibly be to a brand. And then on the agency side, finding the right brand for them. So the type of sports properties that we've looked for that the FTA ticks all the boxes is because it is super fun to watch. It's really, really interesting. And it's also on a massive innovation curve. So a huge uptake, as you can see, over the last couple of years. And yeah, to reference you, Greg, it is snowboarding of the 80s, something that was relatively unheard of, which is now pretty mainstream. So that's for us been quite exciting. And hence why we're so interested in seeing what we can do over the next couple of years with regards to getting FTA to become pretty mainstream and a well attended sport.
I love it. I love it. And so it's great that you're jumping on board. And you definitely need all the help we can get in terms of getting from the big brands and with experts like you guys that have been there, done it for many, many years. And yes, you're correct. It is a new sport. It is the sport board on Instagram. But basically, the kind of trick that we've been able to find is that instead of building something from zero, everyone knows what trampoline is. Everyone has bounced on a trampoline at some point in time. There are literally hundreds of millions of people that jump on trampolines a year because of all the trampoline parks. So it is a very ubiquitous piece of equipment that is out there. And it has only stayed in one little box in terms of the way it's been promoted to the world, which is just the Olympic stream, and nothing else existed. But we look at the trampoline saying it's a stage. It's not just a singular piece of equipment. It is a stage where anything can be done on it. And you'll see all the different things that we were announcing over the 2026 season. MMA on trampolines, esports with trampolines, different competition formats. We can move the trampoline this way, that way. We can put different things on it. We can really use it as more of an audience stage than it is anything else. And this is where, when you kind of just break out of the idea that it's just the Olympics, that's the only way to do it, then all of a sudden a whole world opens up. And this is where I think it's very interesting that we're working with you, because there are so many different things that are sponsorable underneath the FTA banner in terms of different leagues, different athletes, different pieces of content you can make with trampolines and different flips. And there's just a huge world that you can flood in hundreds of brands to all these different projects and basic events and all the different things that the FTA does. And this is why I think it's really cool that you guys are not just looking for one brand at a time. You guys are building an entire network of people out there in different areas that are working together cohesively under the FTA in all the different countries. And I think that's very, very cool. So we really appreciate you jumping on and really just kind of getting involved with this whole new community. But I know the community is trying to figure out, okay, well, what is sponsorship all about? Can you give us a kind of a masterclass 101? what are some of the big things about sponsorship? Let's start with thinking, okay, you now want to get a sponsor. How do you know that you are sponsorable, or an event is sponsorable, or an athlete is sponsorable, or anything? And it's not just the numbers, I don't think, but maybe you can walk through a little bit what you're trying to identify, what kind of flags you're looking for that tell you, hey, this is something cool that brands want to get behind.
I think I'll start with the biggest thing with specifically with trampolining is that, as you mentioned earlier, it takes very little to get started, and it can get started at a very young age. So in almost every backyard in the world is a trampoline, and little kids from the time they can walk are basically on a trampoline, and they're relatively cheap. So it's not a highly expensive sport with a high barrier of entry to get into. Like you don't need massive amounts of equipment. So I think when you say it's ubiquitous, it is everywhere and everyone's got access to it. What's really cool and that makes trampolining specifically quite sponsorable is that you can start at a very young age, and then from there you can either go the level of developing a young athlete into elite and mainstream. But I think more importantly, and this is a really attractive point for brands and for sponsors, is community development. So corporate social responsibility as well. So to answer your question directly, what we look for, or what a brand typically looks for in sponsorships, are different brands are different, but they're two things. Obviously, there's the financial or the monetary side. So if a brand puts X in, they're going to want a factor of X out. So it's quite a transactional exchange. That's kind of a more historical sponsorship model as we've developed, and especially in the last couple of years, brands and companies are wanting to become more integrated into sports and actually being seen to make a difference. So the level of integration between a brand or a company and the sport is a lot closer. So historically, it would be, look, here's a bunch of cash, stick up a logo on a T-shirt, and we're good to go. But the metrics weren't really that well tracked, and frankly, the brand integration wasn't always really well looked at. Whereas, more recently, the questions that we get asked by brands is, uh, apart from the financial aspect, which equals visibility, is how involved can we get? What level of integration can there be? Yeah, I guess the most important thing that makes a sport sponsorable is that the sport, or let's say the rights holder or the entity, there's a high level of reciprocity. So it's not so much of a transaction. It's more of and I don't even want to say a marketing exercise. Yeah, there's going to be either money changing hands or there's going to be product changing hands. But brands are wanting to be authentically endorsed by the sport, and not just the sport accepting the money and promoting the brand out of pure sort of ones and zeros, if that makes sense. So when we talk about working with the rights holder, working with the sport to make them more sponsorable, what can they do that's attractive to a brand to give them the visibility, just through media and through social media, which is quite simple, but also for a brand to actually see that the sport is enjoying the partnership or the integration. And I think that brings a lot more authenticity, which will result in a longer term partnership. So, I mean, one of the big things that we look at specifically when we go hunting for brands to match up with the sport is brand match. To see, is this an appropriate brand for the particular sport? And obviously, every sport's got its own niches and caveats. Certain brands would be inappropriate for certain sports. So, what we typically do is we look at the sport quite specifically in terms of what the sport's needs are, and then go out and find the appropriate brands where we see there could be a good natural integration. So, something like freestyle trampolining, there's a high visual component to it. So we would naturally look at companies that where they can integrate product into that with videography or photography, and then also storytelling. So look at media companies. You're always going to have your mainstream sponsors, which are generally financial institutions and hospitality, and fast moving consumer goods. But again, it's also determined to a degree about what the brand wants to promote. We don't go out of our way to find the wrong brand for the sport. that's going to potentially sort of dilute the reputation of what the brand, what the sport itself is trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you, and that's all very good points. And I like the part where you're talking really overall about the fact that the brand wants to get involved at a integral structural level. They're not just looking at the ones and zeros and saying, okay, well, if I put in $1 million, I want 1.2 million out. Yes, there's always going to be a bit of that from the finance guys, obviously, but at the core of it, does the brand feel that associating with whatever it is that that sport or that project or that campaign, does it resonate with that brand? And I think a lot of guys that we work with in the flipping community in the early years, you can see a shift at the when they're younger. They just, oh, there's a brand, they want to give me money, quick, take the money, 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 right? But they don't care about the brand. They just sort of take the money. They don't even ask, well, did the brand actually get any value out of this, or did I just quickly take their money? Right? But then as they get older, and we're seeing as the community is naturally evolving, they're getting more picky about the brands they align with themselves. Because now influencers saying, well, I'm also a brand. I want to make sure that I'm not aligning with some weird brand out here that's doing some human rights violations, or that is going in some weird direction, or just has this new news press article that just came out denouncing their CEO. I don't want to be associated with that. And as you can see, as they get older, they start thinking about it more structurally as well. And the ones and zeros do matter still, but it's actually almost takes a back seat. There has to be actual integration first. So I really like that aspect of it, because I think that's very key. Some athletes will ask us as the FTA, well, why didn't you just go get sponsors right away? Problem is, you guys were young. They didn't know. No brands knew what you guys were doing. They didn't know what direction you're going. Were you going to the X Games? Were you going to the Olympics? Were you going to just have a broken neck 2 days later? Where were you going? And they didn't know. And it takes brands looking at something over a decade to figure out, hey, is this viable here? They don't just look at it. One viral video does not do the trick. And I think that is one of the most important things that I want the athletes to really understand here. And I'm glad that you're talking about this, Tony, is that it's the structural component and integration at the core level that then allows everyone to sell more products, sell more service, do more of this, do more of that. But if that base just isn't there, then you're just going to be dumping money from both directions into a pit of doom, and no one's going to get what they want. And I think that's a very clear point. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Do you have anything
I
to
think it's
add to that one section?
Yeah, I think it's actually quite important to note as well that if it's a poor brand alignment from the get go, that there's a slight difference between a sponsorship and a partnership. Highly debated topic, depending on who you speak to, but a sponsorship is seen like as a very it's very transactional in nature. A partnership, yes, there's a transaction, but there is both parties are gaining something from it. So, I mean, a sponsorship is literally a brand saying, "Look, we want visibility," and the sport saying, "Cool, we want money." That's more of a sponsorship. Where it's a partnership, it alludes to a more integrated relationship, which we could deem as a partnership. So what you'll find and what you'll see kind of historically over the, if you look at it longitudinally from year one to year two to year three, is that typically most partnerships will start off as sponsorships. If it works well, it evolves into a partnership, and eventually from a partnership it evolves into a relationship. Now, if you look at your average, or what should be your average length of the relationship, should be around 4 years. So it should actually be a 4-year contract that one signs with the hope of a renewal. If you look at it historically, 9 times out of 10 in year one, there's very limited return for the brand. There's a building phase in year two. By year three, the brand's really starting to capitalize, or both parties for that matter, are really starting to capitalize on the partnership. By year four, you should pretty much be at a point where you've built up enough to potentially look at renewing. If you look at some of the most successful partnerships historically, it's the ones that actually do a renewal after 4 years. So the reason I'm mentioning this is that when choosing a brand, one should consider looking at the long game, and sometimes it is a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain. And it's a tough one, because when you are a startup sport or a startup athlete, you're not flush with cash, so you'll kind of take what you get. But the problem sometimes lies in the fact that if you are switching from brand to brand to brand to brand because it was a poor match from the beginning, you also start you develop a reputation with regards to brand flipping. So it's generally better to get aligned properly from the beginning. When you enter the arrangement or the relationship, to have in mind that this is going to be a long-term plan. So often brand negotiations or successful partnership negotiations take a bit of time initially to make sure that the needs and the wants of both parties have been appropriately addressed. So by the time that relationship actually kicks off, or that sponsorship or partnership kicks off, you've already passed the engagement period. So it's almost, you're entering into a four-year marriage basically, and this is kind of what should be in the back of one's mind. Um, as opposed to, look, let's just have a couple of first dates and see how it goes, because those almost always end in tears if they've been poorly negotiated in the beginning. And I often see it where a sport, a rights holder, or an athlete, team, or a league is too desperate for the money to actually appropriately convey what their needs are. So they'll compromise on themselves to receive the funds. And likewise with the brand. The brand just wants simple visibility. You have a mismatch of integration, and then you actually don't have a successful partnership forming. And this is, I guess, a lot of the work that we do, Paladin Brooks Global Sports and Entertainment, is that we sit often as the intermediary between so we sit in the middle, and then we liaise directly with the rights holder or the sport and the brand. And we listen very carefully to what the needs and the wants are of both parties, and then try and match those up and obviously address any pain points in the process. So to make sure by the time we kick off, or something kicks off, you have a relatively good brand match. And should there be some form of disagreement, we're always there to mediate and to work out a way forward, so that we don't end up with a situation where no one says anything and all of a sudden someone reneges on the contract, and then that obviously sours things. So it's a bit of a balance. It's hard in the beginning to do this when you're desperately looking for a sponsor, but to have the foresight of knowing that you want to turn it into a longer term partnership, reap far more rewards later down the line.
I like that you're talking about it's a long term development. Yes, for sure. And again, when we first started in the early years, a lot of the flippers came in and said, "Well, I got a viral video, it got 1 million views. How come I'm not rolling in cash right now from sponsors?" And again, like you said, the brands aren't looking for viral videos; they're looking for long term relationships. They want to see what you're doing. They want to see that trajectory and develop that out over time. And yes, by year 3, 4, that's when you're firing on all cylinders and making sure that everybody is aligned. But the first year or so, you got to explore a little bit. You got to figure out what everyone's doing, because you can have all these nice theories about everything, but when you actually put, it to real tests in the real world with market forces and different things happening and just things you can't control, all of a sudden things are a lot messier in the reality. So a lot of brands are coming in looking for that more long-term development and not just looking for a quick turnaround, because they don't expect it anymore. Unless you're one of the very top tier brands, and even then, the guarantee is not there, especially if you're a new brand, then you really got to take that slow road. And we've been doing that with a lot of the endemic brands, the trampoline parks, the manufacturers of the trampolines. And we've been building those relationships now for 7, 8 years, developing the actual market underneath it. And they're starting to see those returns now, because they're investing more and more now into their flipper teams, into their new product lines. So without that, you don't really have too much to even go with. But now it seems like the whole FTA and the flipping community has really matured a lot over the years, and has established these long-term relationships now, to the point where the bigger players that are outside of the community are taking notice. And I think that's the very cool part to be in. But it just goes back to your point, where it's a long-term game, and it's not something you just quickly call up a bunch of companies, give them a price, and then just wait for them to send a check. And I think that's going to be the real important thing here. But as we kind of build this out a little bit more, so let's go through a hypothetical situation. The FTA wants to go after banks. What, as P&B, what are you guys doing? What's the rough timeline? How long are you reaching out to banks? Are you going directly to people, or are you kind of fishing a little bit and seeing what you can get on the hook? Is this an ongoing, are you probing them every week with some kind of campaign? Or is it just, "Hey, buddy, I already know you from this time in my life, so therefore let's have a quick chat"? And is it quick? Is it long? Walk us through kind of what a process for a major corporate 4-year, 5-year partnership would look like with the bigger brands.
So it's a really good question. Not everyone likes the answer to the question, but this is what reality is. Often what we find with bigger brands, so highly established corporates, is that they are very, and I'm talking hypothetically speaking, well, not hypothetically, rather, it's just more of a stereotype, really. This doesn't apply to everyone, but a lot of the major brands that we deal with, we find have got very much a legacy mindset. So the legacy mindset basically means, look, it's worked for the last 20 years. We are reluctant to adapt to something now. Let's just keep doing what we've been doing. So this becomes somewhat challenging when you are potentially presenting a new opportunity. You are almost from the outset met with some form of resistance just because the proof of concept is quite limited. So typically what you find with the major brands that do have a track record in sponsoring sports specifically is that they have got their legacy sports. And when I talk about legacy sports, I'm talking about sports that have been around for the last 20, 30, 50, 100 years, doing the same thing. They've built up their reputation. The metrics are there. The brand knows what they're getting. They know what the activation looks like, and they feel quite safe with that. To penetrate into a big corporation, there's one route that we go. We can obviously speak about smaller corporations in a slightly different format because they're generally a little bit more open to adapt and onboard something new and fun because they're trying to basically break into a market or innovate. But typically, when we're dealing with a big brand, um, it's a bit like peeling an onion. There are multiple layers to that brand. So if you look at a major corporation that's got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of employees, every company structure is different, whether it's regional, local, global. Some companies are stacked with vice presidents. Some have multiple CEOs. Some have multiple CMOs. Some have one parent marketing division, others have got a million different marketing divisions. And one of the biggest obstacles that one comes across when you're dealing with a big brand is that often a brand that looks big, who you would assume is a big brand, actually falls under a parent company anyway. Dealing with that brand directly almost doesn't work a lot of the time. So what we found generally, not so much in bank, to a degree in banking. So certain banks will fall under a parent, but generally what we find is going up to straight up to the parent group, focusing our energy on finding the right person at the parent level to actually speak to about. So we'll speak to the chief of marketing or a senior director or a vice president of partnerships and try and get on a call with them to just discuss what their different brands are and what the marketing strategies and requirements are for their different brands, to then open up a discussion about, would, let's say, I'll say a startup sport because it hasn't been around for more than 20 years, how and where could that fit into your portfolio and how would that look? So the biggest challenge from the outset is to find the right team to talk to. So the practical way of doing this is maybe quite impractical. It's a combination of strategy and spray and pray, to be quite blunt. So you do your best through either within your network via LinkedIn. There are multiple tools one can use like Apollo or Rocket Reach, where you can basically identify who you're trying to find, try and find the right contact point, and then send them a pretty direct email and be quite open about the reason that you want to chat to them. So typically we would do an introduction about ourselves, who we are, what we stand for, the type of properties when I say properties, the type of sports that we work with. And the reason that I'm contacting said brand is because this opportunity has come up and we feel that it could be a good brand fit for you. Also, and this is a line that we will use, is because it's a relatively younger sport, it's more affordable to get in now as more of a founding, not quite, as a founding sponsor to grow over the coming years. So that would generally be the pitch going in. And then it's a case of waiting and seeing if you get a response. So typically where we would go, we start with email, but then in tandem to that, we'll connect on LinkedIn. So I'll connect individually with somebody on LinkedIn. Also, not necessarily maybe for a specific rights holder, say for the FTA, is mainly for me to just connect with the marketing department of a big brand to actually start understanding what their needs are. So once I've connected with somebody at the top level, I'll follow them on LinkedIn for a while to actually see what that brand is doing, what they're interested in, and for me to potentially see where maybe some of their missed opportunities are, which also then warrants me getting in contact with them individually, either via LinkedIn or again via email, to maybe present an opportunity. And sometimes what we find, because we'll track the metrics, we'll get some interest. People will watch reels or they'll go to a website, but there will be no action that comes thereafter. If we feel that there's a strong enough brand fit, then we'll make a telephonic. We'll do it telephonically and actually get in front of them and saying just, hey, look, I've sent you some stuff. I really do think you should look at it. Really, it's going to take 3 minutes of your time just to consider it. And often once you've sort of cut through a bit of noise, once the person's actually looked at it and seen, all they need to do is watch like a 30-second video for them to get a very short overview of what it's about, to then convert that into a conversation. So, I mean, it's a bit of a laborious process. Obviously, you need to identify, let's say if I took the FTA, looked at exactly what it's all about, what the different verticals do, then let's match that to a brand category, then draw up a list of X amount of financial institutions in different areas, and then start targeting the right people from there. And then it goes through email, through LinkedIn, ultimately telephonic. And then, look, eventually it is a bit of a stats game. At the end of the day, it's quite difficult to not come across as a salesman, because at the end of the day, and I don't necessarily feel this. I don't feel like a salesperson doing this. I feel more like a problem solver. And by problem solver, I'm looking at a brand that's got certain needs in terms of their marketing, because every brand is going to want more A, visibility, and B, reputation. That's what they want. So if I know that I can give them something that gives them the visibility and assists them with their reputation, I'm actually solving a problem for them. I'm not trying to sell them something that they don't necessarily want or need. And this is why you have to sort of lean into the gift of discernment to see what's going to be the right brand, and also what their potential needs are. So yeah, it's quite a methodical process, but it's a combination of statistics, art, and science.
I love it. I love the fact that you're talking about how it's really more, again, you're reiterating that it's a partnership, that it's not just, oh, here's some eyeballs. It's something structural. It's something where the brand is saying, yeah, if it's Red Bull, for example, they can just press a button and they can get a million views. So when athletes come in and they just think, oh, well, if I can just get you a million views, then therefore I get my value. I think that you're talking about, and I've seen this just by building out this whole FTA community, is that it's that underlying value structure that you don't obviously see. It is the idea of Red Bull saying, hey, look, there's a whole new market here. We could spend a lot of money and just dominate it, but we could also work with the FTA instead at a global level and say, how do we slowly work in and find the insider information and figure out where the best discounts are and the best brands to work with, because they would spend, 10 times, 20 times, 100 times the amount of money that we would spend, because we know the community. We essentially have a PhD in the community because we've worked at it for so long, but the outside brand doesn't have that information. So, but this is just a really good point, I think, that you're bringing up, that value to a brand isn't just about viewership. It is about the way you approach the viewership. It is about getting better discount offers. It is about expanding into new territories that they're not there, or helping spread a message in a unique way that is different from the way they've already been doing it. These are not inherently just tied to viewership. These are just different structural ways that you can help a brand. And I would want every flipper out there to understand that if you're going to start going after brands, think about those structural components, not just if you can get them another million views. For a real world example for you flippers who know all this, Ernest got a billion views on his 9 flips and is doing some influencing with Red Bull. But Red Bull head office is talking to the FTA about how to integrate that across the entire ecosystem. These are two different ways to go after brands. The FTA is going after more of that structural value proposition over the long haul, not just a quick video with a viral outcome, but actually something that can grow and develop. And back to something you said earlier, Tony, they want to feel that they're part of that decision-making process. And this is partly why I'm really happy that we could bring you guys on at this pivotal time for the FTA, because now that these big brands are really looking at this, they're saying, okay, how do we get involved, and how do we actually be able to do what they call corporate venture capital, where it's not just here's $1 million and go get me views. It's, hey, here's $1 million, but I want to help you build a structure over here, a new competition league, a new type of esports competition, a new type of campaign about this and that. We can add in a new judging system, new this, use our product, our software, our brand in some value added way that isn't just about the money, that it is adding a structural component to what you guys are doing. And I think that's where the brands really are in a sweet spot, when they can find the sports properties, events, campaigns, even the athletes and influencers, that they can actually show off their product and brand in a case study, a best use case of why exactly that brand's product or service is specifically helping in some bigger way, and then attaching some viewership metrics on top of that underlying strategy. I think that's, again, a really good, important thing that for this, basic starters masterclass, I want these athletes to be able to take away. And I know, Tony, that we're already getting over time here, so I only have a last couple questions for you, and then we'll let you go. We can always get you to hop back on in the
Just
future.
something I wanted to just mention on this as well, and I think it's a very important message for a young athlete to understand, and potentially also even a bigger rights holder being the organization of a sport. Brands get approached all the time with regards to people wanting sponsorship. So often brands, like, they literally feel like, they're just dishing out left, right, and center. And this is what it becomes a bit overwhelming for the marketing departments at brands. So one of the things that we do specifically, and this is on us, is that we as an organization, being a sports consultancy, is focusing very, very being meticulous about our reputation in terms of the properties that we work with, and developing the reputation that should we reach out to a brand, that the due diligence has been done already, for us to go with conviction to a brand to say, look, this is a good opportunity for you, and I really think you should take it quite seriously. I think a lot of young athletes get a bit what's the word? They get a little frustrated that they might have huge viewership on social media, and the brand is still not taking them seriously. The brand doesn't know. Like the guy, like you said earlier, he or she may be getting the million views, but doing really, really well, but might be reckless or irresponsible in other areas. Because the other big thing that burns brand reputation is obviously, if they post behavior outside of sport potentially, or other parts of their lives that might get involved. So typically when we work with organizations, and especially with athletes themselves, to also firstly sift through, but also make sure that they are conducting themselves appropriately in such a way that the brand knows that there is probably going to be some longevity. And this is why it's quite tough for newbies and youngsters to break into it, is because they don't have much of a track record. Whereas when you get guys that have been in the game a long time, that have got a clean track record, it's easier for them to get sponsors. And I'm talking on it with a sport as well. So this almost circles back to the legacy model. So it's quite difficult to break into getting a brand to actually take a bit of a chance on an athlete or a new sport that things are going to do well. And this is again why we focus on doing our due diligence. We can literally sit down with the chief marketing officer of a big brand and say, look, this is a good deal. Like we've done our homework, we've looked at the track record, we've mitigated risk. We really think you should go with this. So I think it's just an important message to just be in the back of one's mind, which almost circles me back to just something briefly. Sorry, I know we're pushing time here, but in terms of choice of brand, sometimes it's not always the best idea to go after the biggest brand. It's sometimes better to go after slightly newer, smaller brands that have on a big marketing campaign that want to be disruptive in the market. Those brands are way more open to taking a little bit more risk, because and going after something that's different and untested, and capitalizing on the type of viewership and exposure they could get.
That's a really good point, and I think that's yeah, it's can't be overstated that everyone just looks at Red Bull, they look at HSBC, they look at American Airlines, all these big companies, and they say, "Oh, how do I get their money? How do I get their money?" But there are so many new young companies coming up that have flushed with some cash from a investment round, even if it's only a couple $100,000, but they are be more willing to part with 20,000 out of their 100 with a new obscure athlete or influencer than an American Airlines is going to be cutting even any kind of size check. So I think that's a really good point, Tony, that you're bringing up. And just to set the table for all these athletes that are now going to start going after more and more sponsors, is to understand that there is a small fish play where you can say where going after a smaller brand is actually more beneficial than just knocking on the doors of all the big brands that already have the legacy, that are looking for way more data, that have way more layers to go through, takes way more time to actually secure a deal. If you're starting your first few sponsorships and you only have 50 to 100,000 followers and you're just getting things going, then you're probably better off finding the new trending new startups of 2025 and starting with that list rather than America's most rich companies in 2025. So I
Yeah,
really like the
exactly.
fact that you brought that up. And you also brought up something very good as well in terms of the behaviors as well. And it just makes a little point that I wanted to bring up, that we had a bunch of brands in the early years when things were actually moving quite quick. Right before COVID actually hit, that definitely slumped the community a little bit and slumped the whole industry because no one could go jump on trampolines in a park anymore. But we had brands on the line. And then a lot of the brands, there was at least a handful of them that out of all the ones that we do work with now, even, and they said, no, look, there's a toxicity in this group or that group. And the flippers who were there know exactly what I'm talking about. There was a lot of toxicity, people bullying each other online, saying just outrageous stuff publicly. And then the brands can go see this at any point in time. Even if I tried to hide it and give them a really nice, beautiful pitch deck with all the great upside, they're still going to go and look at what the brand actually, or what the community actually does in the real world. and what you as an influencer or as an athlete or event manager or whatever you're trying to grab sponsorship for, what were you doing for the last couple months before you made that call? And if you were saying some really rude stuff online, you probably just shot yourself in the foot for a long time, and with the other friends that those brands know, because those brands tend to talk to each other, go to the same conferences, looking for the same opportunities. So there is a old boys club, we'll call it, in the sponsorship world of all the big brands out there. And when you get a reputation for being already a crap talker, we'll say, then that does filter through. So the community has evolved a lot, and that toxicity has gone down, but it actually was blocking the community, no matter what Trish and I were able to do in the early years. So the human behavior around the actual contract itself, getting back to emails on time, not bugging the brand every 5 seconds with more updates or this or that. These kind of behavioral traits, I think, also could take an entire video, Tony. But I just want to make sure that we did mention that. And I appreciate all the insights. Do you have any other final tip for any of our athletes before I let you go here back to the sponsorship hunt?
Yeah, look, I think the big thing, and having been there myself as a young athlete, is to really take some time and understand what sponsorship and partnerships are all about, and understand that it's not that easy. Well, I think maybe another way to put it is not to get disgruntled or disinterested if you send a couple of emails out and you don't get a sponsor, because it's a very, very difficult game. If someone is looking for sponsorship, there's a couple of elements that go with it. So just as a very quick example, brands typically sponsor for a number of reasons. They'll either sponsor. There are probably three main reasons. They'll either sponsor out of performance. So let's say it's an individual athlete. They'll want to sponsor the person that's winning, because the person that's winning is going to get noticed all the time. The brand can associate directly with the winner. The second thing that a brand would sponsor for is social outreach, make it like high viewership. So you don't necessarily need to be coming first or placing first or being on the podium, but you've got incredible people skills and storytelling, and you can tell a story very, very easily, and it's the brand is able to tell their story through that sponsee, quite easily. So they don't necessarily have to be coming first, but it's more about like the journey of being in a sport. It's interesting for people to engage with and watch and to follow. The brand integrates quite well with that. And then the third reason is legacy. So I think in terms of either performance engagement or legacy, I think with regards to a new sport or a young athlete, we rule out legacy. Legacy means something that's been around for a million years. A sporting team or a club that's been around forever. Everyone knows it, whether they're winning, losing, whether they're antisocial or not. Everyone knows who they are. Some brands go after that. So I think the first two are quite important. I think for an aspiring young athlete to really make a mark, or for a sport, or a team for that matter, is aim to be at the top level of your game in terms of performance, but very importantly, along with that, is be sociable, correct behavior, and have a good story to tell, a good storytelling capacity. If you can market those two things quite effectively, I think you stand a better chance. And then the other thing I'm going to say, and lastly on this, is it takes an average, and this is basic statistics, between 3 and 8 touch points before you actually get to speak to somebody. So if you send off one email and hope for the best, chances are there's a 99.9% chance that you won't get a response. So you need to be persistent and persevere, not to the point of harassment, but fairly persistent to try and at least get a hard yes or a hard no, and not silence. And I think, we avail ourselves, if someone wants to chat to us, we're more than happy to help from our side. So if there are youngsters out there or anybody who's interested, feel free to get hold of us, and we can actually just have a chat about how realistically what it looks like, and look at a person's situation and how they can put themselves in the best position to be sponsorable, to market themselves effectively, just with their social media content, their conduct, what they should be focusing on in terms of lifestyle management, which again will filter on into performance. So it's good to chat to a professional in the field who's actually does this full time to really get an intimate understanding about the deeper level of creating a successful partnership.
100%. And I love that you're talking about telling the story. It is storytelling. Humans are storytelling creatures. They love to hear a story, whether it's a story they made up in their head about why they're doing something, or a story that they heard from somebody else about why they're doing something, or just a collective story that we call humanity. People love that. So if you can package a story around something that you're doing, whether it's giving back to charity, if you're a flipper and you go to a local charity and start doing backflips for $10, get a couple of viral videos of that and send that to a brand. You know what I mean? Something very simple where it actually tells a very micro story, but says, look, I'm out in the society, I'm doing cool, fun stuff, I'm helping a bigger cause. I'm not just here, my hand out looking for money, which a lot of
Yeah.
flippers still just, where's my money? Money, money, money.
It's such a good point, Greg. That is such a good point, because what that also does is it taps into the grassroots. It's grassroots development. It's giving back. It's showing gratitude. It also reiterates humility. So often what you'll find is when an athlete, or a sport for that matter, starts to do really well, there's a lot of arrogance that creeps in. So in the world of sport, you deal with a lot of hubris, and brands don't like hubris. So it's good to maintain your connection to maintain, like I said, maintain humility, stay grounded, stay human, be a lot more approachable. It's a lot more attractive for a brand to see that, because at the end of the day, most, well, if not all brands, their consumer is the man on the street or the woman on the street. So they need the entity or the person that they're sponsoring to be able to resonate with the consumer or with their target audience. So and I think a lot of athletes don't fully realize that a lot of the time, and this is why a lot get overly focused on um, performance only and kind of fake social media views, and not actually showing the true, the slightly deeper level of being, taking a more philanthropic approach.
100%. It shows honesty, like you said, humility, and it shows that you mean something. I think people are really aware when you just have your hand out looking for a quick cash grab. They now are almost more sensitive to the idea of, is this flipper, is this influencer, is this event property, are they doing good for the world, or are they just trying to peddle some garbage product that really isn't actually helping in any way? And I think that's a reason that we've been able to get a lot of sponsorship and investment to the FTA over the years, is because they see that what we're doing is building an actual community and not just a quick viral video or something like that. So I think that's a great way to leave off our first discussion, Tony. And I really appreciate you jumping on board here with Hannah and the whole team and your network. And we're going to definitely be giving everyone updates, and we are going to be making a full feeder system. So for you athletes who are listening to this right now, and you guys want to get involved and want to be able to actually talk to Tony, talk to me. We're going to put together a little team. We're going to put together a little system, a step-by-step approach, so that you'll be able to talk to Tony and you'll learn as you go, so that by the time you are ready to start really going after sponsors, Tony and his team will be able to help you directly. I'll be able to help you, and you'll know what you need to know to be able to make it a success. So thanks, Tony, for a great first discussion. Let's get you back on in the future once we have some updates for everybody. But thank you so much, and I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you on the hunt.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It was an absolute pleasure to chat to you. And yeah, I look forward to more of these. There's some really interesting discussions to be had. So yeah, we'll definitely set another one up. But otherwise, yeah, have a good day, have a good week. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what's going to happen with the FTA in 2026. I think it's going to be a fantastic year.
I think so too. Everyone's super excited for all the great announcements we have coming up. So you're just the first one, and it's good to be first in line, and I can't wait for the rest. So thank you very much. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.
Awesome. Cool. Cheers. Thanks, Greg.
All right.